So in this property, we have the purchaser bought about 6 months ago or so. There was a smell of mould in the ground floor. I think it was a relatively elderly lady that lived there. And there was a recommendation to have rising damp treatment. So I visited it. There are three things that are quite obvious and picked up immediately. So firstly, there are signs of hygroscopic salts by the chimney breast. There are signs of condensation, and there's a risk of condensation because the bathroom extractor fan wasn't working properly and there was no kitchen extractor fan, and obviously drying clothes downstairs. But I think it's a lot better because a dehumidifier has been used. Actually, the clothes are being dried on the first floor rather than the lower ground floor. But there's also some penetrating damp to the front. I don't think it's penetrating the whole way through, but it's just leaving a small stain. So have a listen to the survey, during the survey, the evidence, and then the data loggers. And so this property's been damp proofed, as I understand it. Just to show you these two things. The very common risk of dampness in properties comes from hygroscopic salts, which are released by historic burning of coal. Right. And hygroscopic means that it attracts moisture from the air, and there's a particular salt called calcium nitrate that has a specific relative humidity of 50%. So you will get dampness in zones like this whenever the humidity is above 50%, which it normally is. It's very rarely below that. I don't know that for sure because you've also got calcium sulfate salts, these surface salts of calcium sulfate, almost certainly. So I'll have a better look at that. Right. But that would be the standard issue here, would be from hygroscopic salts, and they're not a source of moisture, they're not a source of dampness. They are just in what's called dynamic equilibrium. So that means that they are evaporating out moisture at the same rate as they're condensing it. Wow. And it's not a problem, it's just a scientific fact. The only thing you can do about them is, well, you can do lots of different things, but the one thing that is easiest is just to cover them in an oil-based primer. So Zinza cover stain is what I recommend to people.
Okay, Zinza cover stain.
And it will remove the sight of them. Damp proofers will tell you have to replace the plaster. Yeah. It's doing the same job, but the problem with replacing the plaster is that you're stopping the breathability of the wall. Right. Zinza cover stain is like putting a little plaster on it, whereas putting in slurry, which is what damp proofers would recommend, right, will stop the whole wall from breathing. Right. So there, you see this here. Yes. That's a sign that's been damp proofed up to that level. Okay. So that will be impermeable slurry that will stop the breathing of the wall. That's why everyone's talking about lime on this road. It's to keep the wall breathing. It's better for it to breathe, but I just don't think it's worth replacing all the lime when the principal root cause is condensation, and it's better for the environment, it's better for your health, it reduces the mould if you just drop the internal vapour levels down by increasing the ventilation and dehumidification. But it looks like you're actually doing quite a lot of that anyway. So okay, well, I'll have a more of a look at that now.
Okay, great.
So this is a fireplace that's been blocked up, and that's showing dampness there, and then it goes down. That's a sign of hygroscopic salts. Likewise here. That's more or less normal. then it'll go back up again. This has been damp proofed down to there. So you tend to get dampness around here. That's damp deep within the wall. Oh, there's an area of dampness. It's presumably penetrating down the half of it. Tend to get a build up along the ridge because this is impermeable with permeable absorbent plaster, allowing vapour to fall in behind and get trapped by the slurry. Being damp proofed here is, oh, maybe not, maybe it's just replacement. So I'll show you this. It's a thermal imaging camera, and it shows you where all the zones of heat loss and therefore risk of condensation and mould are. It's a relative one, so blue is cold and red is and white is warmer. Yeah. It's quite useful to see where you're getting the heat loss. And you know, you can obviously improve insulation. So there's a lot of heat loss at the base of the wall. Unfortunately, slurry, impermeable slurry, increases the heat loss, and it's not great. The one thing about condensation, the one thing about hygroscopic salts is you don't get a trace of dampness from it, because it's in dynamic equilibrium. So you get, when water evaporates, it causes heat loss through entropy. Right. And as it condenses, it does the reverse. It causes heat gain. That's why dehumidifiers are a really good way of reducing vapor as well as releasing heat as part of the part of the process of using the energy. So this is in the calibration unit, which has sealed unit, 75% relative humidity because it's salt and water. If we just look at picking up the data now, so if I press the name like that, maybe my there you go. So it was in the right place before. Press the calibration, and then we're just going to up that to 75%. So the quickest way of doing that is to put in 6. There you go. That's 75%. Temperature is normally quite accurate, and then we'll do it for each one. Okay. To send them, so press the green numbers, and then that's synchronizing it. So the data's held on the loggers itself, and that's just drawing in the data from the logger. It takes roughly a minute per week of loading the data, so it can take a bit of time. Okay. But what I'm going to get you to do is download all the data onto your phone, send them to me now, and then send an update in a week's time, and we're going to make some changes and just see if that improves the data. Okay. I mean, you're doing a lot of the right things anyway. I think most of the issues predate you were the previous occupiers. Right. The smell of mould is an indication. Okay. So if you press the calculator sign and then press the export sign, and then down at the bottom, export CSV. You can do open CSV. It's another way of doing it, but let's try export for now, and then put it into to simon@dampsurveys.com.
There you are.
Yeah, and then send that. Yeah, the green. You got it. So that's successful, and then back, and then do the same for the next. What I'll do is I'll collect it. I'll put it onto the damp.ai/detect for now, and then I'll give you a commentary in the video. But you yourself can do it in the future, so you can see your own improvements and so on. I mean, I'll do the improvements now and discuss it. So the fan is cut out after about 15 minutes, so I can extend that to half an hour, but I'll see if I can improve it.
Is it, sorry, which one do I press?
Just the top right.
Top right.
Exports.
Exports, yeah, 15 minutes, okay.
So I encourage you to use this website, damp.ai/detect, which I made specifically for this type of data logger. It's going to improve over time, but bear with me. For now, what you need to do is choose the file, which I've already put into this folder. In this case, I'm going to encourage you to use the front room because that's where the worst of the damp was, and choose the closest damp or wet room, should I say, so source of moisture, in this case bathroom. And you want to go to the date of the survey, which is on the 13th at about 10 o'clock, and put in the temperature of the coldest part of the damp wall, which was recorded as 8.4. And this will give the surface relative humidity. So this green line here is the surface relative humidity. It's very close to 100% where condensation takes place. It's very high over this whole period when humidity is above the 85%, when mold is likely to form. Now we'll talk a little bit more about this in a sec, but the red line is the surface temperature and the blue line is the dew point in the room. This thin grey line is the dew point differential, or the difference between the dew point in the bedroom or living room, should I say, and the bathroom. So you would naturally have a shower at this time of day, and then this will show up as a spike. And what you don't want is for that to feed through. And in fact, I don't see a big increase in moisture in the living room, which suggests that there is some extraction of vapor, and doors are being kept closed. So that's great news. But what I'm seeing during this period is that the outside temperature is going up, but the indoor temperature is remaining more or less constant. As the outside temperature is going up, also the relative humidity is going up, and that's probably because there was a rainstorm going through. And you'll find that you have higher temperatures and more vapor during rainstorm. And in fact, the vapor is feeding through into the inside from the outside. And basically the solution to this is to increase the temperature, insulation, and or dehumidification. Ventilation won't solve this problem if the outside vapor is more or less 100%, which it looks like it is there. So this is where this blue line is close to the pink line, is where you've got high external relative humidity, because this is the dew point line and this is the external temperature line. So you can zoom in on any time of day and really explore it and try and understand what happened on that day, why you have high surface relative humidity. You can analyze it by pressing the analyze button there, and you'll see in this case you're only complying with Dew's law 7% of the time, so 93% of the time you're not. So Dew's law is the rule that you need to keep the internal dew point measured as temperature below the outside temperature at all times to reduce the risk of condensation and mold. It's also better for health and carbon neutrality and so on and so forth. You'll feel warmer at lower levels of relative humidity. It's good all round. So use this and measure it and do all the things that I recommend, which are going to be increase the use of extractor fans, admitting that your bathroom is going to move fairly soon, so there's no point making major changes there, but make up for it by using more dehumidification. 20 plus litre per day dehumidifier running constantly downstairs will go a long way to solve the problem. So I'm just using a damp meter, or as I put it onto masonry, as I like to call them, dry meters, and this wall is dry. There are no hygroscopic salts here. You do find them more on the ground floor.
Okay.
But you do find them actually quite often on the top floor as well.
Really?
Those are the two most common places to find them. They are triggered by dampness, so you'll probably find deep within this wall that there's dampness, and the typical triggers are replacing the plaster with something else which is damp. Ironically, damp-proof as slurry will often release the salts, making it worse rather than better.
Right.
Then things like, condensation, extreme condensation can cause them to come to the surface. A leak, any form of water really will. But replastering, removing a chimney breast, all of those can release.
Right.
But as I say, they're not a source of moisture. You don't have to worry about them. You actually don't need to do anything. But if you're repainting the room, why not put a primer on?
Why not put a primer on? That's interesting.
And I would do 2 coats, and I go, this isn't obviously the room that we're talking about, but say this is the damp area here. I go 300ml both all the way around, and 2 coats of it, and you should be fine. But if it comes back, then you just keep going. It's very inexpensive. It's like £20 for a pot of it.
That's really useful. Thank you.
Solve a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So in the kitchen, even though we're on the floor above the damp floor, you can feel all the air is just flowing through here, so it's not ducted out. So it's useless, and because you've got an open doorway, all the vapour from here will diffuse out. Vapour is lighter than O2 than air, so it will tend to go up, but some of it will go down as well through diffusion. So you've got an extractor fan here. Looks quite dirty. We'll have a look at that. So this is running at 3.2 and it should be 15, so it's not doing much. It's barely moving anything out. It's probably a bit dirty. So if we look inside here, the ducting has been pushed down, which is going to create some resistance, but I don't think that's the whole story. There's very little air coming through here. I mean, obviously I'm not using a funnel. That's in the car. I do feel some air, but not much. Interesting. Presumably that's filtering out the leaves. Seems to be effective. The render is obviously not original, but it looks in okay order. I'm not seeing cracks in the render on the outside. Nothing much to report, I would say, here. So, yeah, that's what stops it from operating effectively. There will inevitably. Do you have something I can? There's a chair, isn't there? On the quite like this style of fan because, as far as I understand, I'm just increasing the timer. Just check that it's the right way around. So that's getting. Oh, I have to do it. Got so full of dust. I can't even turn this. That has to go anti-clockwise. Normally it's clockwise. This particular fan, it's anti-clockwise. So that should be now half an hour. Actually, I've already cleaned it up. So this particular fan is one of very few where it's got some sort of battery mechanism that allows it to only have a single electrical source. Other fans all have. So it's good. It's good because one of the biggest expenses in using fans is getting the electrician to put in all the wiring. I don't know the manufacturer's name. Do you have a vacuum cleaner?
Yes.
No, I'll shall I do it now and then? Oh, it's alright. If it's not at hand, don't worry.
It's honestly fine. You're going to get an extension down. We'll just make the brush.
No, it's more to get the loose, but I think it's pretty clean now.
To get the what?
To get the loose dust out of the
On the inside?
Yeah.
Oh, I could do that. Hold on.
I mean, because it's connected. Oh, I see the problem. You've got if you look through here, it's inappropriately ducted. You can see the ducting through there. Despite the cleaning, that's not much of an improvement. I think it's just an old fan. I think you need to replace it. Despite the cleaning, it's still not great. I think it's an old fan that needs replacing. A simple test is to put some paper up. Well, it's just staying up, but it's only just. I would normally use a A4 sheet. Likewise on the outside, oh, that's just the wind blowing on the outside, but it should be blowing about 45 degrees horizontally. So insufficient ventilation. You can see hygroscopic salts on this wall, although that looks partially painted at the base, but those look like hygroscopic salts. It's obviously your neighbour's wall, but it's very common in this period of property. Here the ground is away, so there's no groundwater. So on the outside what we're seeing is this is a French drain. They don't work very well. They were used as a form of damp proofing treatment. Anyway, so there's render, and the render is cracked. That crack is going the whole way through, and so you want to fill that. I would rub it down, fill the crack with caulk, and then paint over it with impermeable paint like Zinza or Dulux do one as well. Likewise there. These cracks and higher up. See water coming from the top of the building will pour all the way down, and these horizontal cracks will absorb in moisture more. And there's dampness on the inside around there. It actually doesn't look like penetrating dampness because it hasn't got a brown stain. However, there is probably heat loss causing condensation. I'll have a look. I don't think it's going to be a leak because you're not in it's not a zone where you're going to get water from leaking unless it's a radiator leak. I suppose it's potential but unlikely. And it looks more like condensation. The drying out process is speeded up with a dehumidifier, airflow and heat, and use a damp meter. So I've already done this, but I would get yourself one of these, and then you can measure it over time as it's drying out, and you'll know that my recommendations work. I would say this style of property tends to have damp issues because it's got a lower ground floor.
Yeah.
These were typically built before 1875, before public drains were installed, and that's why that's why it's lower ground. It's not. So after public drains were installed, people had wanted to have the loo on the ground floor, and so therefore had to build them higher up, because otherwise you've got this difference in height. But so you've got a lower the hill runs away from here.
Yeah.
But the road is probably about a metre or so above the front. So a lot of people will claim that's a risk of rising damp, but actually rising damp only comes from groundwater. It's the water under the water table, and in London the water is pumped out, the groundwater is pumped out to something like 65 metres below ground level. So the risk of rising damp is nothing, but the true problem is with condensation with these properties, and lower ground floor properties always have a risk of condensation.
Yeah.
If you look at the front, I know you're not connected, but often these properties...
Oh, sorry, let me
I'll
look at the bottom.
So this is a suspended timber floor, and you can tell that because it's a bit hollow. And I'm going to... these are tongue and groove floorboards, so I can't actually drop it in down there. They're overlaid on that looks like a timber under there. So, but normally in these cupboards I can find somewhere. Oh, there's a data logger in here, isn't there?
Oh yeah, actually.
Oh no, I've taken it out. So I can just get a probe in through there and just measure the subfloor void with humidity.
Would that be is that the end of the floor?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
That's the floorboard. So in this period property, there's only a very small gap, probably about 10 centimetres, 100 mil. So the purpose of the subfloor void is to allow airflow underneath to stop rot, essentially.
Okay.
And to keep, well, it was originally for grain storage. Comes back to Roman times, to try and keep it off the cold floor where condensation could cause dampness, or soil, the damp from the soil. By and large, if you were going to have rot, you would have had it by now, and your floor would have been destroyed and replaced with a concrete floor, which is the way tend. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I will put a probe into the subfloor, but it's not going to tell me too much of benefit.
Right.
But it's just something I like to do.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
So I've just put this. This is essentially a probe, and I'm just putting it down there. We were just talking about EWI, which is external wall insulation. You have to bear in mind that old properties may be restricted through planning permission from putting it on, because you're changing the outside look of the property. There's also, the government is likely to pressurise local authorities to accept it within planning permission, and there may be grants involved. So I know the government doesn't have a lot of money at the moment, but there was a grant at one stage around COVID 2021, something like that. The government gave actually quite a lot of money. I think it was 8,000 towards it. Can't remember off the top of my head, but most external. I'll have a look at your walls, but most external wall insulation uses what's called PIR, which is polyurethane something, which is impermeable. It doesn't allow water to pass through it, and it can cause sweating, and it can result in, if you get cracks in it, like any render, water can get in behind the cracks, and then it can't get out because of the impermeability. Right. So I think it's relatively safe, but I would any contractor go and see the results of their work, because plenty of builders will offer it, but actually do so little of it that they're not really haven't got the technique right. If you look at where I live, and you can tell that from the invoice, you'll see 2 properties within about 50 metres of the property where they have EWI, and I would say it's pretty successful. I actually did a survey at one of theirs because there was dampness, and that is because of what's called shallow fit, whereby it's harder work for builders to go around elements like chimney breasts, and they often leave pipes, and they can leave a zone where you're not getting the benefit of the insulation, whereas everywhere else is getting the benefit. So you get this cold loss.
Right.
It's a sort of it's artificial, and it's not like it's any worse than it would have been in the first place. It's just it's what's called a cold bridge. So just be aware of, you don't want to have shallow fit.
Yeah.
So that means it should be all insulated. Right. And think about zones like around the what are called reveals, this section here.
Yeah.
And it's worth having a little bit of internal insulation there.
Internal insulation. Yeah.
Just because you're always going to get this zone here. And just to jump backwards, with all insulation, you have to remember that no property is going to be perfectly insulated unless you spend so much money. Like the International Space Station is obviously well insulated, but cold water pipes, any cables, any pipes, any ducting in and window reveals are going to have a zone which is poorly insulated, which is this zone here. You've got a single glazed window as well. So you always have to deal with the vapor levels, and in this property at the moment the vapor isn't too high. If you look here, this is showing the dew point. The dew point is a measure of the amount of vapor in air, and it's 4.9. The external temperature is around 5 degrees centigrade. So you're actually obeying Dew's law, and Dew's law is that you should always keep the internal dew point below the outside temperature at all times.
Okay.
And I'll explain that more, and when we look at the data loggers, we'll be able to see more.
Thank you.
Actually, let's have a look at those now. Yeah, so in my opinion, the justification for the damp proofing industry is based on hygroscopic salts, as you've got here, and you'll get companies that analyse these salts, and they will do what are called gravimetric readings, and they'll even do salt composition. Personally, I can see it. I don't need anyone to tell me what the composition of the salts is, but at different levels, and they will say, oh, that's rising damp, and it's risen to that level. It's not. It's come from the chimney breast. It's come from the burning of coal. Coal, I don't know what the precise chemistry is behind it, whether it's the calcium nitrates in the coal or whether it's a chemical process during the burning of coal. But anyway, that's where they come from primarily. Right. They also come from animal excretions, in particular horse urine, and you get them around stables, around old barns, right. Farmyard barns. There's a particular one I had where it's outside a converted shop, and you can see them on the brickwork outside. In fact, it's on number 10 Downing Street. If you look at that's why it's been painted black.
No, really?
Yeah. Wow. But the whole justification for rising damp treatment, it costs this country about £2 billion a year. This whole thing is based on a misunderstanding of it. And I actually got in touch with the self-proclaimed spokesperson, people for the damp proofing industry, about doing a scientific study into the movement of salts, and they refused to.
I'm surprised.
Because it would undermine our whole industry. But anyway, that's what those are there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So if you're keeping the bathroom on the lower ground floor, I put in a continuous flow extractor fan because of the extra risk you get in the lower ground floor. But if you're moving upstairs, I'll put this film so you've got it.
Oh, I was going to write down continuous.
So if you're moving upstairs, just have a normal extractor fan, purge extractor fan with the 30-minute overrun. Make sure of that, 30 minutes. So it needs to have an electrician put 2 sets of wires in for normal fans. This type you can, but I don't think they're particularly powerful, and that's part of the problem. So I've come across damp properties I come across have all sorts of problems, and it's not necessarily related to the fan, but this fan's not working very fast. So keep the door closed, keep the fan running. I've extended it to half an hour.
Oh, thank you.
I would leave the light on if you can, possibly keep the window cracked open.
Okay.
You've got one of these trickle vents, although it doesn't seem to be working very well. It's not going the whole way through, so it's not doing any good. So yeah, keep this there. You've got some render cracks on the outside to the front, and I think what's happening is it's causing condensation on the inside because it doesn't look like it's coming all the way through. I'll explain that more in the video. And you got hygroscopic salts, and I think the surface salts are from when the lady was living here and had lots of humidity issues. So I don't think it's current, and they can just be rubbed away, and then primed, and you'll be fine with that. And everything's pretty good. So I'll it's better than it would have been before. Oh, I'll go and have a look at the humidity meter.
Great.
It was showing 75% before.
Did you say that? So the cracked rendering is
on the outside.
This little list down there.
Yeah.
How would you fix
so that's so 75, so that's all good. No excess vapor and stuff. So that to me looks like it's a condensation leak because it actually hasn't got a brown stain, or it's very, very faint. But what you can have is where you've got penetrating damp on the outside causes the brick to dampen, damp brick is a poor insulator, and you get heat loss, and it's that. You've got no natural source of water upstairs, so there's no kitchen, bathroom. You might have a radiator, but a radiator leak will look long and thin, not like that typically, and you'll normally have a brown stain, a distinctive brown stain, not a light brown stain. So that's why I think it's coming from the outside. But there is a render crack just there, so you need to sort that out anyway. So the plan is to open this up, not this down. This is structural at the moment, so you need to get an RSJ. But it's your terraced, so you don't have. You are terraced, aren't you?
Yeah.
So you don't have a risk. So sometimes you have a risk of what's called interstitial condensation from RSJs, because the RSJ goes onto the outside of a wall. But since you're terraced, you don't have that risk.
Right.
Obviously, you'll get a structural engineer to recommend. But the things that you want to think about is a kitchen. You want to have a good extractor fan that's quiet. It's better to have a kitchen extractor fan that is quiet but not as effective than one that is effective and noisy, because people will never use them because they'd rather chat to their and I would use it, and I would cook with and the shorter the run, so if you had your hob here and your extractor fan here, the shorter the run, the greater the effectiveness for these. Well, the greater the effective, the less the resistance within the tube. But you want to get a rigid duct
Yeah.
rather than a flexible duct.
Right.
And then otherwise I would monitor with data loggers, and I would run a dehumidifier 24/7
Oh, okay.
down here.
Down here.
We do.
Oh, really?
Most of the people I know do.
Okay.
Especially if you ever go away. You're on your acting assignments in the States.
Yeah.
If you're over in Hollywood.
That's interesting.
So it'll work. So in conclusion, the root cause of damp is the primary cause is excess vapor. That's why you were smelling the mold when you were coming around. Mold only grows where relative humidity goes above 85% for long periods of time. There are some hygroscopic salts in the chimney breasts. They are not a source of water. They're in dynamic equilibrium, and you want to deal with the other root causes first, and then simply cover them with a primer, an oil-based primer like Zinza cover stain. And then the third one is penetrating damp, and you need to fill all those cracks to the front, all the render cracks to the front, and any cracks to the rear, but the ones that I noticed were to the front. And what was happening is that water is coming through the wall, but it's not penetrating the whole way. That's why you're not getting the brown stain, but it's causing heat loss, localized heat loss, which is causing condensation. So the next steps will be to continue monitoring with the data loggers, always making sure the internal dew point's below the outside temperature. You want to improve the bathroom extractor fan, ideally have a continuous flow bathroom extractor fan, but I know you're changing the bathroom, so there's no rush to do that. You can just leave the lights on with a low wattage bulb. You want to put a kitchen extractor fan in. Again, there's no point doing that until you start moving it, but just be aware that there are issues. Dehumidifier is always good to have one, 20 litre plus, and the render cracks, you need to do that. Okay, thank you very much.